Good afternoon. My name is Jim Conlan, and welcome to the latest edition of our entertainment show called Classic Series, the documentary where we look at iconic movies and TV series throughout the decades that have left their mark on the industry, and which is termed the cult classic as documentary. In terms of this week's episode, we're looking at a movie. We're going back to 2008. It was one of those iconic first type of car destruction type movies, in terms of the original concept of people fighting for their lives in a sort of a car race sort of environment. It was called Death Race. It featured Jason Statham, Joan Allen, Tyrese Gibson, Robin Shaw, and obviously one of our distinguished guests today, Robert Lasardo, who played the character Grimm. And Robert, pleasure talking to you today. Thanks for joining us in our Cult Classic documentary series and to preview Death Race. Death Race, phenomenal success. When it came out, it was budgeted 45 million. It grossed 76 million worldwide, and it was one of those first movies of its time. It was shot in 50 days. 35 cars were used throughout the movie, 85 mechanics, and 250,000 detail per car was used on the sort of movie. So no expense was saved to make Death Race such a success. And how did you come about, Robert, to get involved in the project and land the role of the character Grimm?
Well, first of all, Jim, I have to say that you've certainly done your research in terms of the details surrounding the film. So if I had a hat, I would take it off to you. Respect for doing your homework. Like any other film or movie project, I went through a series of auditions and callbacks until finally they decided to hire me. It's as simple as that.
And Robert, in terms of Death Race, I suppose it sort of brought two genres together in terms of adrenaline, sort of fast car racing environment, and the whole sort of prison environment. There's sort of a niche between the two, where you got convicts having to survive not on the inside but almost on the outside, in terms of this sort of rigorous environment where they came out of their cells and they did not know at the end of the day where they're going to go back into their cells again that evening.
Well, it was a great opportunity for me as a character to be allowed to kind of leave the trappings of solitary confinement or the jail cell and kind of play around on a racetrack. That was a new record for me, driving a race car. So definitely something new at that time.
And Robert, in terms of the character Grimm, I suppose, what were your thoughts on playing such a character when you saw him on the script, in terms of the screenwriters and producers, when you saw him on the paper? What was that sort of perception that you wanted to carry about him? I suppose it was a demeaning sort of a character. Obviously, he committed some bad atrocities throughout his career, but what did you sort of want to portray him in terms of to make him sort of different?
I make it a point never to judge my characters. They're neither good nor bad. They just have a job to do. I try to, in any filming situation or creative situation, to give authenticity to the characters that I portray. And I don't assign judgment. I just read it, use the imagination to bring it to life, so to speak, take it up off the page. And then the mechanism around me helps assist that. And with Death Race, it's kind of a thrill ride type of film. It wasn't a drama, it was an action film. So I felt like the character, as two-dimensional as he may have appeared on the page, clearly it was my opportunity to give life to that character based on character experiences prior to that movie that to me were building blocks to that sort of apex. I had been playing characters for many years that had either been incarcerated or perceived as a nefarious type doing bad things. but I've never been in a situation where the character was placed in prison, in a car, racing around on a track, shooting at other inmates. I thought that was kind of fun. And so I think the aspect of it that to me seemed most realistic was when Grimm, the Reaper, was in the main yard, and he was walking across the yard, and he happened to see the warden, played by Joan Allen, who I'm a big fan of. And so for me, when he makes the comment that she's the baddest ass in the yard, I really meant it because I was a fan, and it was just a lot of fun to be able to walk in the same proximity of such excellence, such power, such beauty. So there wasn't much acting going on. It was very realistic for me in that moment. And that was, to me, probably the part of the character manifestation that was the most genuine. Yeah. Everything else was just contrived based on the manipulation of the mechanics of the spectacle, the cars flipping over, guns blazing, things blowing up. I mean, it was basically a three-dimensional thrill ride. It was a theme park movie type thing. It was a kind of a film where people didn't want to just see a movie, they wanted an experience, sound, and visual. So in that sense, I think it definitely served its purpose. When you do these things, you have no way of really knowing how they're going to turn out. So until I actually saw, when they called me in to do what they call audio-digital replacement, sound dubbing, I didn't really understand or had no way of knowing or foreseeing the significance of the film's impact. No pun intended, until I saw what they did with the cars. I knew they were spending a lot of time and money building the cars and blowing them up and flipping them over, and there was not a whole lot of CGI involved. They did it for real. So I thought, wow, that's very ambitious, and I respected that they took their time, as you so eloquently described, a very detailed exposition. It was very true, but to see it manifest on the screen like that was just, I had no way of conceiving that it would come out that way. So I was a bit shocked, didn't realize its significance until I actually saw it. I thought, wow, look at this.
And I suppose, Robert, you mentioned there an awful lot about the special effects and the stunts that were on Death Race and being taken back by what you saw and what you were exposed to. Do you think it was probably ahead of its time? And for you coming into that sort of environment, did it sort of excite you more when you saw what was going on? Were you being able to come up in your head and sort of visualize what the final product might be in terms of that, in terms of going to work every day to see the stunts that were taking place in front of you and see that sort of exposure? Did you feel to yourself, wow, this is going to be a real exciting and a project that's really going to take off when it hits the cinemas?
I had no way of knowing any of that. I was just grateful to have a job and to be working for Universal Pictures, because they were the studio that put it out. And I was, I think the profundity of that experience was when I first arrived in Montreal, and day one we sat down and did what they do traditionally as a table read with all the lead actors, Ian McShane, Joan Allen, Jason Statham, Tyrese Gibson, I can go on and on. And that was exciting, just to sit in the company of actors of that caliber. And Jason was very friendly. I said hello to him. He smiled at me, and he meant it. You meet a lot of people in show business, especially when you work in Hollywood, not the independent film apparatus, but the Hollywood apparatus mechanism is a whole different deal in terms of ego. So sometimes, some of the movie stars you meet or the people you meet that are in powerful positions don't always live up to your expectations. And so Jason lived up to him. He was really nice. And so was Ian McShane, very friendly. And I don't know, it's just, for me, there was really no way of knowing its significance. For me, the significance was in the moment when I got to meet, like I said, these actors and do the script read through and just know that I was involved in something on that level in terms of the kind of exposure potentially would get because of the kind of film it was or is. But I had no way of knowing that it would become tagged as this iconic film, or cult classic, as you say. It's very nice to know that it lives on long after the memory of it, because when was it, 2008 that we did this? It's been quite a few years since this project hit the screens, man. So it's nice to know it still has a shelf life.
And I suppose, Robert, you mentioned there an awful lot of topics, and you mentioned about in terms of the detail of the movie, but the detail of the characters themselves. I mean, 36 different masks were tried out before they settled on the final mask for Frankenstein himself, in terms of that sort of character detail. And we know the sort of chemistry in terms of the sort of the fight scenes and the camaraderie between the actors, in terms of Jason Statham's sort of fight scenes within the movie as well. So were you sort of, was it an enjoyable set in terms of the camaraderie? Was it a set that you were said, did you went to work every day to and sort of enjoy the experience of Death Race? Was it a movie that where you look back with sort of fond memories of?
Yes, I have fond memories. My character was a bit isolated given the way they set him up within the story. So a lot of the time I spent was inside the vehicle, being spun around on these gyroscope apparatuses. So for me, it was like going to work was like going to an amusement park every day. It's kind of nice. And I thought also what was fascinating is the time and detail they took to make a robot, the Grim Reaper, the robot that was inevitably crushed and destroyed at the end of the film, or the end of the sequence with that character. They put me in a full body cast, head to toe, put straws up my nose, and then they wired it like some human grenade, so that when the truck hit the robot, they pressed a button and detonated the head so it would explode exactly the way they wanted to. So we talk about precision and detail, man. Woo! They spent a lot of time and efforts into building something that looked very, very realistic. I remember Paul Anderson saying, "Hey, Robert, come on, look, they're going to kill you. Watch, the truck's going to kill the Reaper." I'm like, no, I don't want to look at it, man. I don't want the memory of something that looks too much like me, for real, seared into my psyche. So I didn't look at it. I didn't watch them destroy the robot, but I thought, wow. When I saw the film, people came up to me for years would ask me, "Robert, how did they do that? It looks so realistic." I said, "Yeah, I know. It does look a little bit too realistic. So realistic that when about, about a year after the movie came out, I paid very close attention to crossing the street out here in LA. Because I think in America, some moviegoers have trouble with discerning reality from fiction. Catch my meaning? I don't want to end up in Death Race for real."
And Robert, I know it's a busy time for you. You're probably one of the most in-demand actors in the business in terms of the volume of sheer roles that you play in terms of movies and TV series. And in terms of coming, I know COVID held up the business for a while. I know it's probably busy times for you again. In terms of later on this year or into 2021, are there any sort of movies or TV series you're currently involved in that might hit our shores here in Ireland and UK later on in the year?
Well, I will say this with humility, and I stress humility, that there's too many to mention. And actually, I was busier during COVID than prior to COVID. So don't believe the hype. But I will say there is a film that's, I believe, I was told by the producers, that's going to be released through Lionsgate, a distribution platform, a film called Bloodthirst, starring Costas Mandylor, myself, Tara Reid, Bishop Stevens, Rich Rendon, and several other people. It's a post-apocalyptic type deal. Vampires have taken over the world, and I play the vampire. And we're at war with another faction of vampires, and the humans are kind of there for just, I guess, a snack, something to eat. So that should be coming out, I think, on somewhere around about maybe Halloween or something.
Okay.
It's called Bloodthirst.
Bloodthirst. We'll sure to look out to that, Robert. And I suppose, Robert, just lastly from me to you, in terms of Death Race 2008, people are still look on fondly in the memories of the Death Race sort of movies. Do you think there was ever an opportunity to maybe to go down the route of the streaming services like Netflix and Amazon and Amazon Prime and sort of run a sort of mini series and look more into the concepts of the Frankenstein character throughout the decades and the previous people who might have taken on that role? Do you think that's a possibility? And lastly, what in your eyes determines a cult classic? Is it something that lives long in the memory, maybe 10 or 20 years after it's out, that people are still talking about it, or something that has its sort of niche particular audience that it'll always have?
To the first question, creatively, I think that's a tremendous idea. But it's also something that the business decides upon. It's a more of a mathematical question in terms whether or not the governing entities that control the property of death race feel that it's advantageous to move something like that along. So that's more of a business question. But the creative side of it makes a lot of sense. I like your idea. It's tremendous. But us little performers here really don't have much say in these type of things. As far as what makes a cult classic, yeah, I agree. I think that if it lives on in the minds of many, and it's passed on from generation to generation and stands the test of time, so to say, as they say. And young people are smitten by it, then yeah, I think that's the true test, whether or not over time it still has significance, makes impact, and the newer generations can take the torch, so to speak, and run with excitement, going, wow, this is a great movie. Even though it's an older film, it still holds up in contrast and in relationship to an industry that's extremely competitive and ever growing in terms of the special effects phenomena that keep progressing. So I think Death Race has found a way. From what I'm seeing, I didn't know one told me. I'm being told by yourself and others the significance of it, more so than I realized myself. So I'm glad to hear that. It's, for me, films that resonate and stay within the psyche, the memory, so to speak, and make impact for whatever reason are the ones, the great ones, as opposed to the throwaway, forgettable, an hour and a half of just killing some time, and then the next day you can't even remember the title of the film. So when a film, the title, its significance, or if it provoked an emotion or a feeling that still stays with you when you look at it, then I'd say, yeah, you definitely did. You did it. You made history.
On that note, Robert Lasardo, a pleasure talking to you this evening. Thanks for giving us your time to look back on your memories of Death Race back in 2008. And still nearly 13 years on, we're still talking about it. We look forward to seeing you in Bloodthirst in relation to this, your role as the vampire sort of new generation, something that's very common at the moment with all the Van Helsing, the whole sort of vampire sort of industry, the business, and close enough to Halloween around the corner as well, so no doubt it'll be very popular as well here in Ireland as well. Robert Lasardo, thanks for taking your time. Thanks for sharing your memories playing Grimm in 2008 in Death Race. This week's episode of Cult Classic movie, looking back in our documentary, looking back in the movies. But as we go back, delving into the vaults, 2008 was the year. Death Race was the chosen movie. Our actor this week, Robert Lasardo. Robert, pleasure talking to you, and we wish you all the best in your future endeavors. And please, God, hopefully we can speak to you sometime again in the near future.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jim, for having me. And P.S.
You can't kill me. Robert, take care, mate. Have a good one.